Let me get situated here. Good morning. Today is, what is today? The 16th, December 16th. Welcome to the appeals court hearing for pretty much primarily Target Corporation. Brendan, would you like to call order? Or actually roll call?
Board Member Crow.
Present.
Board Member Little.
Present.
Board Member Sisk.
Present.
Thank you.
All right, everybody rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it
stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing. All right, I'm going to place everybody under oath that'll be testifying to the board today. You and each of you to solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give and the matters now pending before this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you. You may now be seated.
Thank you, Brendan. Are there any public comments? There's no public here. Okay, any comments from the board? All right. Well, that takes us right into it. Okay, so items 8 through 12, I just signed off, correct?
Yes. So
Okay.
these
We
are
need a
just
motion?
regular stipulations.
Yes, I've received them via
Okay.
email. I reviewed.
Okay. Okay, looking for a motion to approve?
So moved.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you.
Please vote. All right, that passes.
All right, on to the regular agenda. Application 16-11086 through 16-11093. Target Corporation.
Yes, Chairman Sisk, we I did not provide copies of the applications for your board today because I just figured it was a waste of paper. So we have 3 years of business property appeals for the Target Corporation, years 2016, 17, and 18. The parties have agreed to hear all 3 years at once. Findings of fact have been requested and paid for by the applicant. And these are for various Target properties in the county. They're just decline in value appeals for each of the years, 2016, 2017, and 2018. The applicant has the burden of proof. Their exhibits have been handed out. They have a total of 5 exhibits. I don't know if you want to ask either of the parties for more information, but that's pretty much it.
Okay. I believe since the applicant has the burden of proof, they get to present first.
Yes.
Okay, Assessor's Office, any issues if we just kind of roll into it? You're not on.
Todd Court with the Ventura County Assessor's Office. We can just have a general overview real quick. And
If you'd like to give us an overview, that'd be fine.
yeah, so it's as Brendan's already spoke to, it's Target Corporations for the lien dates 2016, 2017, and 2018. It's for all 8 locations within Ventura County. The appeal is the personal property and trade fixtures. And what I mean by personal property and trade fixtures are stuff that you see at a Target store, like the shelving, any type of racking, the carts, the fixture items like refrigeration equipment, other things like personal property, like office furniture they may have in their back room. It does not include the merchandise. It does not include the building or the land improvements. And
Yes.
I believe that's.
If I could just add briefly to the overview, there is, as you can see, a lot of information being provided by the applicant, and the assessor will provide a lot of information as well, not quite to this quantity. But just to help narrow down the issues of what we're talking about here today, we're talking about whether the cost approach or the sales comparison approach is the most valid methodology to value this type of personal property. The State Board of Equalization recommends the cost approach for this type of property. We're also going to be talking about if we are going to do a cost approach, what would be the most appropriate economic life to be used. While the applicant and the assessor agree on many of the lives that we would use in a cost approach, we do differ in some very significant ways. Whether we should use what the BOE recommends or go out to other sources for economic lives. And the third issue is whether or not the applicant will meet their burden of proof to demonstrate that an additional adjustment for economic obsolescence should be applied. Clearly, we disagree on that point, but I did kind of want to focus in on those issues for you so you could, kind of just wrap your heads around all the information that's going to be
Okay.
coming at you. So with that, we'll conclude the overview. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can you state your name for the record?
Yes, opening statement. I'm Mark Miller with Altus Group.
Mark, okay.
And I think contrary to what the assessor said, we're not really here to talk about the cost approach or the sales comparison approach to be the most appropriate way to value this property. We're not talking about what the appropriate useful life is of the property at all. What we're talking about here is the actual fair market value of the property in Target's possession at their stores within Ventura County. We intend to prove throughout our presentation that the tables utilized by the county only factor in physical deterioration in the depreciation rates recommended by the Assessors Association, and don't factor in economic obsolescence, which is a big factor, as well as supply and demand, impacting the assets of Target. So we will be talking about different ways that we have quantified obsolescence using Target's actual data, sales data, market data. We'll also be talking about how our appraiser went to the market to do sales comparison approaches to determine what the fair market value was. Just to be clear, I think a cost approach would be fine to value this property if that cost approach was reconciled to the market and gone back to the market to verify, does the cost approach return what the market bears for this property? And that's where I think the error currently lies with the assessor's office. So
Okay.
that's kind of what we want to talk about today. So without further ado, I'll jump into the book.
Okay,
Okay. So we're going to start off with this bound book here.
okay. Exhibit 1.
One, I guess.
Okay, so applicant's exhibit number 1.
Yes. So before we start opening up the book, just kind of give you a little bit of a rundown with this project and how we got involved here. Target asked us to review their personal property tax position in Ventura County, California. As part of that review, we went through our normal course of action, reviewing the cost reported on the 571L, as well as the useful lives used by Target to report that property. And on the flip side, how the assessor's office then enrolled the values, what tables they used to enroll the values, and what costs they picked up. But from there, we did a bit of a deeper dive. We started to look into see if there are any other factors playing a role in the value of Target's equipment other than the physical deterioration factored into the mass appraisal tables used. And what we found was very surprising. The retail industry as a whole has changed significantly over the last 20, 30 years. But the tables California used to value that property has stayed the same. We have things like the rise of e-commerce, where customers no longer have to go to a brick and mortar location to purchase goods. I can acquire goods on the internet, have them shipped to my house or to my location of preference within a few days. E-commerce has also enabled sellers and buyers of used retail equipment to find a huge marketplace of goods available for purchase at competitive prices, as opposed to 20 or 30 years ago, where you were really limited to a very local market and prices were inflated as such because there was less supply and solid demand. And finally, customer preferences have changed a lot in the last 20 to 30 years. Gone are the days where you can be dropped off at an apartment store and finish your Christmas shopping in one location. Customers today are leaning towards specialty locations and retail establishments to have a more diverse product mix, as well as sales associates that know more about the products that are being purchased. Now, because of all these changes in the retail industry, retailers like Target, Kohl's, JCPenney's, Macy's have all had to drastically change the look and the feel of their stores to bring back traffic and sales that have left their stores to other platforms. And what we found is these changes have kind of happened in plain sight, and they're kind of hard to identify unless you really know what to look for. So we always like to kind of start out our presentation with some pictures, kind of showing you where retail has been and kind of where retail is today. So with that, let's turn to tab 1, page 2, and you'll see some young men looking at shoes. And this is a great representation, I think, of old retail past and retail present. If we look to the photo on the left, what we see is kind of the old methodology to retail. Floor-to-ceiling fixtures, a need to leave with a product that day because there's no other means of making that product at that vendor. If you didn't leave with your size, your color, your item that day, the store lost out on that sale. Let's contrast that to the current day. The focus is much more on the brands. Retailers know that you're going to be on your phone comparison shopping, you're going to be price comparing, you're going to know that you have additional colors, sizes available, that you can hop onto their website and make that purchase there, have it shipped to your home, or have it shipped directly to the place of business. This has drastically changed the amount of fixtures that you would need in a store, right? If we look at these two photos, we have significantly more fixturing on the left. That's because we're trying to cram as many SKUs as possible into that location to give the buyer the best chance of being able to walk away with an item that day. Very different what we see on the right-hand side. Let's turn the page, and we see an example from Target here, an old Target. As we see here, similar to the last slide on the left-hand side, it's very cluttered. There's tons of items on the shelves. It's a little bit more modern in look, but it still has that old retail feel of tight aisles. You can see in the background there's a need for directional signs. The fixtures are so large that most individuals can't really see where they're going. They have that need to be able to have the directional signs to help them throughout the store. Let's turn the page now to page 4, and we see a newer Target, much more open, less shelving. You see the change to table height fixtures and setups depicting goods as they would appear in the home, as they'd be used by the end consumer, as opposed to the old tropes of retail, your T-racks, your slat walls, those kinds of things. And this speaks to that trend we were talking about earlier, with customers wanting that more boutique retail feel. Locations such as like an Ulta Beauty, all beauty supplies, all makeup, an entire retail establishment based on that. The associates know more. You have a much deeper dive than you would at a department store at their makeup counter, right? Why is Target doing this? Well, as we talked before, it's to entice customers to come to the store. A brick and mortar retailer has 2 hurdles they have to overcome. They have to have the right product mix, first of all, sure. But secondly, you have to come to their location for them to make a sale in brick and mortar. With the rise of e-commerce, that's no longer the case. And as such, in order to drive traffic, Target shortened their holding period of their assets, right? What happens here is, as these stores are remodeled more frequently, the old unused fixtures are put into the used market. Supply increases and demand drops as fewer and fewer retailers are opening new stores, and the remodels are done with different style of fixtures. What results is supply and demand imbalance, and the value plummets. Let's turn to our next slide here. And I want to point out here, it's not just the fixtures that are changing in retail, but the format of stores as well. We have Blockbuster Video here to the left. I think we all remember going to a Blockbuster and hoping for the best, and they have your movie, have what you're looking for that day. And if they didn't have it, you were kind of out of luck, right? You had to go home with your second option or maybe empty-handed. Let's think about now what a Redbox has, right? Granted, it's still that same model. We might still not have the item that we want, but I don't need 130,000 square feet and hundreds of thousands of dollars of racking in order to house that movie. I have one small box. I can put it in a strategic location that traffic is already going to. And I have my market satisfied. What we found here is retailers are starting to do the same thing. They're starting to subdivide their space. So you'll see retailers like Kohl's actually taking a 100,000 square foot store and cutting it in half and having a grocery store or a gym take over half of the space, as Kohl's realized that they don't need the full 130,000 square foot space in order to have the same level of sales due to e-commerce being able to buoy that sales activity. The result, again, here is that smaller locations are being built. So as retailers are building new locations, they're not building these giant super Targets or Target Greatlands, as you remember back in the early 90s that were getting built. They're building these small market Targets, right? And again, with these smaller stores and the smaller fixture footprint, as we saw from the first slide, the amount of fixtures needed for these stores goes way down. Supply gets bigger on the open market. Demand goes down. Supply and demand imbalance results, and the value decreases. Let's go ahead and let's turn the page now. Looking at a Best Buy, some electronics department. Looking on the left, again, floor-to-ceiling fixtures, need for directional signs, very similar to what we saw on the first slide. We look over here to the right, something very interesting. This Best Buy looks a lot like an Apple store, right? Apple's one of the fastest growing brick and mortar retailers in the United States. And its competitors are taking notice of that. Notice the table height fixtures. There's a sampling of their goods on there. They know that you're going to be able to go online, find additional sizes, colors, styles to fit your needs, and you can make that purchase online, and they can still make that sale. Let's go ahead and turn the page and see an example of a Target electronics department that has been changed over. As we see here on the left, standard slat walls, these standard gondolas, lots of SKUs being jammed into these fixtures. And then we look over to the present. This is the new electronics rollout for Target. As we can see here, very streamlined, much more similar to that Apple store, that new Best Buy feel than we've seen previously. Turning the page now to page 9, we see some other trends in retail. It's not just e-commerce anymore, right? We can now push a button on my washing machine and have detergent delivered to my home in 2 days. That is something that previously had several aisles of a grocery store or a department store would have Tide and dishwashing detergent. This is similar for a lot of products. E-commerce has really changed the game in terms of how customers interact with the retailers and how they make their sales. The final picture there is kind of the newest evolution of this e-commerce, this streamlined way to make purchases. We have Alexa now. So rather than having to go on a website and click my item, I can say, Alexa, I need more milk. And Alexa sends me more milk in 2 days. I don't have to go out in the rain. I don't have to go to a retailer. I don't have to hope that they have what I'm looking for. I say the words in thin air, and the item appears within a couple of days. That is the new reality of retail. That is where a lot of these sales are kind of going, and that is what has shaped brick and mortar retailers today. So let's turn our books now to the next tab, comparing U.S. population and retail square footage. So we just went through some significant changes impacting the retail industry. And during the time that those changes were occurring, we as a nation were also overbuilding our retail space. This chart compares the last U.S. Census, which was 2010, to 1980, and compares obviously population to U.S. retail square footage. This data is based on Census Bureau population counts, and studies by IBM and NYU. What we see here is between 1980 and 2010, the United States population increased 36.3%. Not too bad. During that same period of time, U.S. retail square footage increased 118.2%. The old thought and mantra used to be, if you build it, they will come. And prior to e-commerce, that really was the case. However, as we've found the rise in e-commerce and changing customer trends with sales leaving the brick and mortar environment, underperforming stores are being closed. Stores are being remodeled more frequently. All that upsets supply and demand as these old fixtures flood the market, and fewer retailers are building new stores as they're kind of correcting the market from the overbuild previously. When demand goes down and supply goes up, value drops. And that's really what we're dealing with here in the case of Target's property. We have some support behind that, for that calculation behind there. But let's go ahead and let's turn to tab 3, page 24. Okay, so we've looked at some changes that have happened in the retail industry, and we've seen that as a country we overbuilt. We have way too many retail square feet for the amount of people that we have living here. So we decided, okay, let's see exactly how California's 12-year table has changed over a similar time period to see, how they have factored in these changes in the evolution of the industry. And what we saw was a little surprising. No material changes over the 16 years we show here, and it goes back even further to when the tables were originally created. Despite the changes in equipment, consumer preferences, et cetera, we essentially have the same table since their creation based off of mortality lives of power poles on Iowa curves. That's what we're basing these off of. Meanwhile, we have e-commerce thriving. We have retailers changing out fixturing very frequently compared to what we had previously, and yet our tables remain the same, unchanged, which leads us to believe that there may be a problem with the value derived from those tables. So at this point in our review, we've seen the changes. We've seen how California really hasn't done much to address those changes. So we said, let's take a step back and let's figure out if there's a way, if there's any guidance out there that we can find to show us how to quantify this additional loss in value to Target due to these external factors. And what we found, I'm on page 25, tab 4, the Board of Equalization conveniently came out with these guidelines, specifically entitled Guidelines for Substantiating Additional Obsolescence for Personal Property and Fixtures. And so what we did was we reviewed this guidance, and we made some decisions in terms of how we were going to move forward with this project from there. And I'm not going to review and read the entire book. I'm sure you are all familiar, but I do think there's a couple important sections here that we've highlighted that I want to make sure we read through. On page 25 here, it states, the tables are intended to promote uniformity of assessment for use in mass appraisal. However, appraisers should be cognizant of how to recognize and measure additional obsolescence in personal property and fixtures. Right off the bat, first page, the Board of Equalization is telling us the tables are meant for uniformity, but you really need to be aware of what you're appraising or assessing, and you need to make sure that you're factoring in all forms of obsolescence. I'm going to skip ahead now to page 29. I'll give everyone a second to get there. And we have this passage that says, relevant data pertinent to the assessment of a specific property should always be reviewed and considered because the value determined by use of data contained in AH 581 may need to be adjusted for actual available market data. Again, clear as day, Board of Equalization is telling us, just because you're using our cost approach and the tables that we give you in AH 581, you should go to the market to make sure that those tables are reflective of what's happening in the industry and in the market. I'm going to skip ahead now to page 31. We're going to talk a little bit about the reproduction cost approach. At the bottom of the page there, if everyone's there, it states, the difficulty of using reproduction cost increases as property ages. When a property would not or cannot be exactly duplicated, as is often the case, reproduction cost loses validity as an indicator of market value. So again, the further we get away from that historical original inception date of cost, the less reliable that cost approach becomes. Let's go ahead on page 32, variations of the cost approach. It says related to the cost approach, the assessor should consider all forms of depreciation that apply to a particular property, but should also be aware of the limitations inherent to the approach. Again, the Board of Equalization stating to our assessors, hey, there are limits in this cost approach. We understand that it's the best way for mass appraisal and for uniformity, but if you have property that fits outside of this standard box, you really need to look to the market to make sure you're capturing all forms of depreciation. I'm going to skip now ahead to page 35. There's 2 pages there. And we're going to talk a little bit about external obsolescence. External obsolescence, also known as economic obsolescence, is a loss in value resulting from adverse factors external to the property that decrease the desirability of the property. Now, exactly here's what we found during our analysis and the changes in the retail industry, right? Because of the rise in e-commerce, the supply and demand of retail equipment has been thrown out of whack. We have supply increasing greatly as people remodel more frequently and stores close, and demand going down as e-commerce takes over and fewer brick and mortar retailers are opening new stores. Moving on to page 36, to continue about external obsolescence. This is an interesting point. I've had this brought up at a couple of hearings now, and so I've never highlighted it because I don't feel it to be really relevant, but assessors continually bring this up, so I wanted to read this passage about operations and profitability. It states, continued operation or continued profitability does not necessarily disprove the existence of external obsolescence or indicate that no external obsolescence exists. So again, the Board of Equalization is telling us you can't just look at the company that owns the asset to determine if obsolescence exists. You have to look at the industry in which these assets operate. Because just because one person has managed to remain profitable, remain open, doesn't mean that the assets in that industry haven't experienced additional obsolescence. So again, continued operation or continued profitability does not necessarily disprove the existence of external obsolescence or indicate that no external obsolescence exists. I think that's a very key point the Board of Equalization makes to us here. Let's go to the bottom of the page here. And let's talk about the market method. The market method is the preferred method when reliable, I'm moving to page 37, data are available because it captures all forms of depreciation, including both external and functional obsolescence. We'll get into in our next tab here how these tables were kind of created and what the tables used by California quantify. They're based on Iowa curves. Those Iowa curves factor in physical deterioration only, do not factor in any obsolescence, which we'll get into here in a little bit. I'm going to skip ahead a few pages now, and I'm going to jump to page 53. Everybody there? Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about taxpayer evidence for a second. It says here about 3/4 way down the page, evidence may be presented in a number of ways, including the form of an independent appraisal, a market study, price lists for new equipment, and/or data from used equipment price guides. An independent appraisal is an appraisal conducted by an unrelated firm that specializes in the valuation of personal property and fixtures. The appraisal typically includes a listing of all the property included in the valuation. The appraisal may include itemized valuation of each piece of equipment or a total value estimate. The format presented must clearly identify the appraisal approach and may vary depending on the appraisal approach. For example, cost, comparative sale, and income used by the appraiser. So again, the Board of Equalization is telling us when you have property that you feel may have other forms of depreciation hitting this value, the best way to quantify that is to go to the market and have an independent appraisal report done. That's exactly what we've done here. Moving ahead, I'm going to skip now to page 55, and we're going to wrap up just with some limitations of the cost approach. And I think this is kind of our issue with the assessment issued by the county that's currently on the rolls. Here on page 55, it says the limitations of the cost approach, when available or possible, it is best to compare the estimated value to actual market value of similar property to verify accuracy of results. You'll see today as we work through our appraisal report that there's some significant differences between our independent appraiser's opinion of value based on a market approach and the cost approach issued by the assessor. Our contention is if that cost approach had been reconciled to the market, that there would have been additional consideration for obsolescence made. Because that reconciliation wasn't done, the cost approach only was issued, and the value discrepancy exists. Okay, so that kind of wraps up the BOE guidance. And we have a pretty clear idea now of how California wants us to quantify our assertion that obsolescence exists for Target. One thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit was that obsolescence, economic obsolescence, and how these tables are created and what they factor. And to do that, we looked at Marshall valuation. I'm now on tab 5, page 56, correct? Page 56? Okay. The cover page here, Marshall valuation. So Marshall valuation is one of the most respected value resources in the country. We thought it would be interesting to see what they say about the retail tables that they recommend and the value and what's included in their tables. So let's take a look there. I'm now going to skip ahead to page 57. In the bottom right-hand corner, they're talking about the use of the depreciation tables. Here they're talking about Marshall's valuation tables, their depreciation tables. In number 7, it states that you should note any excessive obsolescence that may require special consideration separate from the normal depreciation developed from the tables. So again, Marshall valuation is saying if you're going to use our tables, you should be cognizant of excessive obsolescence and look at that separate from what you're getting from our tables. Related to the remaining life tables, they state the remaining life tables are based on mortality tables derived from studies of building and equipment, discarding all cases of mortality due to excessive obsolescence. So again, this is basically physical deterioration only. There's no obsolescence getting factored in here. And that's something assessors should consider and be aware of when utilizing these tables. Skipping ahead to page 58, talking about depreciation, it is the overall depreciation tables in this section consider the progression of normal deterioration and obsolescence based on age and condition for the class and usage of improvement. Any abnormal or excessive functional and any or all external obsolescence are considered separately and are not included directly in the tables. Clear as day, Marshall valuation telling us any external obsolescence is completely separate from this, from our tables, our normal value tables, and you should be aware of that when using them. Turning the page to 59, we talked about external obsolescence. We reviewed the California Board of Equalization's definition. Let's see what Marshall Valuation says. It is a change in the value of a property, usually negative, but can be an enhancement caused by forces outside of the property itself, and is not included directly in the tables that follow. Again, Marshall's saying clear as day, we're not factoring in any obsolescence, external obsolescence in our tables. They go on to talk about some external indicators for things that may result in economic obsolescence. It says competition or alternatives, right? Well, that's exactly what e-commerce has presented to brick and mortar retail, right? A competition, an alternative to make these same purchases, right? Changing consumer habits, purchasing power. That's, again, exactly what we talked about. Consumer habits have changed. They want specialty retail. They want e-commerce. They don't want the giant department store. Let's continue reading on page 59. The right-hand side, halfway down the page, says, certain industries, such as fast food, hotels, markets, and other retail chains, which are highly competitive and responsive to rapidly changing consumer tastes and or investor holding periods, may require frequent major renovations and fixture changeouts in search of market share. Consequently, excessive functional and separate economic obsolescence rates that move much faster than normal physical deterioration may require special consideration depending on the value sought before establishing an appropriate effective age and or typical life expectancy with which to work. So again, Marshall telling us before you set your useful life, before you determine what tables to look at, to utilize, you need to understand the type of property you're dealing with, the industry it's in, and what factors are impacting those assets. Let's turn the page now to page 60. And just to kind of recap here, Marshall Valuation has a range of life that they're going to recommend for retail fixtures. They're going to recommend anywhere from 7 on the low, 9 on the average, and 11 on the high. So 7 to 11, California chooses to use a 12-year table. So a year over what Marshall Valuation is saying we would recommend. It's just interesting to note. So now we know unequivocally Marshall's table is telling us only physical deterioration, no economic obsolescence. So I thought it would be an interesting exercise to compare the California 12-year table to the Marshall Valuation 12-year table. Because if California is factoring in obsolescence, surely there'll be a significant difference between the two tables. So let's turn the page now, tab 6, page 61. And unfortunately, we see fairly identical looking tables. Maybe a % here or there. Typically, for the first 5 years of an asset's life, California is 1% lower, percent good than Marshall Valuation. And for 5 through 12 years, it's the same or 1% higher. So pretty much the same table. So what we can draw from this, the conclusion is that California's 12-year table, based on Iowa curves, same exact rates as Marshall Valuation, also does not factor in any form of obsolescence for external obsolescence, only the physical deterioration. And the problem with that, as we've already discussed, the industry has changed significantly during that same time period. And if we're not going to factor in those changes into our tables, the resulting value that gets issued will be overstated. Okay, so we've kind of gone through now some guidance in terms of change in the industry, how California's asked us to review and quantify obsolescence. And we've got Marshall Valuation's thoughts on obsolescence and what their tables do and do not encapsulate and include. At this point, we wanted to kind of look through some sales data and some of Target's own data to try to quantify the impact of obsolescence on their actual assets. And give me 1 second to grab a drink. Thank you. And I'm going to turn to tab 7. I'm on page 62. Correct? And we're going to look at some remodel time spans. Marshall guidance showed us that certain industries have shorter holding periods, and based on certain things happening in those industries, those holding periods can be reduced even further. And that's certainly the case for Target. What we've done here is we've looked at remodels for Target that were done during the 16 through 18 tax years we have here, here under appeal. We've looked at almost 100 remodels. And of those remodels, we see that the average duration between remodels is about 8.34 years. Now, we were quantifying a remodel as about $1 million in spend, something that would change the look and the feel of a Target location, something material to kind of drive in that traffic. And again, about 8.34 years, I find interesting, right in the middle of Marshall Valuation's range of 7, 9, or 11. Again, I don't think that the useful life is really the core issue at the heart of this problem. But if we're going to use a 12-year life when a very respected valuation guide says 7, 9, or 11, and we provide data that shows that maybe 8.34 is what we're actually holding it, would a change in life get us closer to the fair market value? Absolutely. I do, however, think that the actual fair market value appraisal is a better way to quantify that. But this is one way we can certainly look at it. So let's go ahead and let's look at our next tab here, tab 8. And we're going to look at the rise in e-commerce sales. We mentioned earlier that e-commerce is a big driver for obsolescence in the retail industry. To quantify that impact, we analyze e-commerce sales over a 10-year period as of each lien date. So in our chart here, you'll see 2016 is identified with blue coloring, 17 with green, and 2018 is red. I won't belabor this slide too much, but there is one point I wanted to show here. Every year, 16, 17, and 18, we show about a 200% increase to e-commerce. What that shows us is that e-commerce is a legitimate threat to brick and mortar retail. If you're able to grow at 200% clips every single year, that's going to really change the industry and reshape how it functions. We certainly feel that way. All right, let's go ahead and turn the page now to tab 9. For this analysis, as well as our next analysis, I've got one for every year that we have under appeal. I have an 18, a 17, a 16. The exact same format, calculation, everything else, the same data sources go into it. I'm going to talk about the 18 tax year, which would be the first one, to kind of expedite things a little bit. If board members of the assessors have any questions about a specific year, please just let me know, and we can delve into that. Okay, so similar to how we quantify the impact of obsolescence, we show the growth of e-commerce using sales data. We have a similar analysis on the NAICS code sales to quantify the drop in overall sales within the retail industry. So just to give you a little bit of background here, NAICS stands for the North American Industry Classification System. And what that does is a number is assigned which groups companies within similar companies get grouped together within an industry to give folks an idea of how the industry is performing overall. What we did for this analysis is we took the sales from the U.S. Census Bureau as well as the CPI factor to create a CPI index factor. What this does is effectively negate the impact of inflation on our analysis. What we did then is multiply our total sales by the CPI index to get to an apples-to-apples sales comparison for the NAICS code grouping of 4521, which is department stores. What we found when we ran those numbers is a 33.4% drop as of 1/1/2018 in the retail industry, which we feel is due to economic obsolescence and the changing of the industry. I think the big takeaway here is that while the industry as a whole for this NAICS code shows a 33.4% drop, that doesn't really break out the difference between brick and mortar and e-commerce, which would, I think, be helpful to understand how impactful e-commerce has been. This kind of shows total sales with all those e-commerce numbers included, and we still see a drop overall, which is interesting. 9B and 9C, again, are the same analysis, just with updated numbers. And as you can see there, the numbers are similar, 33% in 18, 37% for 17, and 34.5% in 2016. Let's look now at tab 10A. And I'm on page 75. So while our NAICS code analysis showed the drop in total sales, again, it didn't break out the difference between e-commerce and brick and mortar, which we thought was key to our analysis. So we were actually able to get some additional data points, which we were able to pull together in this analysis here, which we call our 10-year trended sales analysis. I'm going to walk through each column here to get you comfortable with where we got our data set from, and then walk you through the calculations. I think this is a very telling analysis for our position and really supports our appraisal. What we've done here is we've taken, as we said before, our NAICS code analysis is great. It shows how the industry as a whole is performing, but it doesn't really show us the difference between e-commerce and brick and mortar on a company-specific basis. So what we were able to do here, in order to get that data, we subscribe to something called the top500database.com. It's a website that's compiled by Internet Retailer Magazine, and what it does is it tracks the top 500 retailers in U.S. For e-commerce, and it tracks those sales by year. So with that data, I took our CPI trend factor, the same factor you see on our NAICS code analysis, and then I took U.S. sales in column B and U.S. retail square footage in column C. We took both of those data points right from Target's 10K, and we have all the support behind this analysis for you. From there, in column D, I was able to take online and mobile application sales from top500database.com to come up with the total e-commerce sales. At that point, I trended up the total sales and the e-commerce sales to get to that apples-to-apples comparison again, getting rid of that inflation factor. And at that point, what I was able to do, if Target sales have two possibilities, right? It's either brick and mortar or e-commerce. If I know the total and I know the e-commerce, the difference between those two gets me just the brick and mortar. So by subtracting the total trended e-commerce sales in column F from the total trended U.S. sales in column E, I get the total trended brick and mortar sales in column G. Now, we can't really just make a comparison off of this, although there is a drop if I look from 2008 to 2017 of a couple $2 billion. But what I really have to look at is Target is opening and closing stores all the time, right? So I really have to divide then by total U.S. retail square footage to negate those openings and closures, right? If I open 1,000 stores, obviously sales are going to go way up. And if I close 1,000 stores, sales total for the company are going to go way down. So we divide by the total retail square footage to get us to our number here, the trended brick and mortar sales per square foot. And this is an interesting number. When we trend it for the last 10 years, we see that the trended brick and mortar sales per square foot had a 10% decrease over the last 10 years. When we contrast that with just the e-commerce, we see a 270% increase to e-commerce over that same time period. So what this shows us is that while brick and mortar retail is decreasing and sales are dropping, Target is being buoyed by these e-commerce sales that are keeping them profitable and keeping them solvent with a 270% increase over that 10-year period. Now, other than the data that we kind of broke out in this table, I was reviewing this on the plane out here, and I saw a couple of interesting items that I wanted to point out to the board members here. If I look at column B, we're talking now about the 18, 17, 16 tax years, right? Obviously, my sales years here, I am in, as of 1/1/18, my 17 tax year sales, $71,879,000,000. That is less than when I was at 1/1/16. So without any trending, just the raw data, Target has had a decrease in total U.S. sales of a few $1 billion over the last over just the years we're here talking about our appeals. At the same time, one thing I find interesting, let's look at column C, U.S. retail square footage. 2013 tax year, we have 240,054. I'm rounding here. 2014, that decreases to 239,900. 2015, 239,539. 2016, 239,502. And 2017, as of our 1/1/18 tax year, total U.S. retail square footage has dropped down to 239,355. I have decreased retail square footage in the United States of America at Target every year since 2013. That is a direct result of online competition, e-commerce. And let's talk about something else for a second. It's not just that I'm just closing stores. Like we talked about earlier, we used to have Target Greatlands, which were hundreds of thousands of square feet of retail space, right? What's happening now is they're closing those giant Greatland Targets, and they're opening what they call city Targets, these very small, you see a lot of them throughout more metropolitan areas, but they're swapping out these giant 100,000 square foot areas with a couple, 10, 20, 30,000 square foot here and there. So what we're seeing, again, when we go back to supply and demand, I used to need $3-4 million to outfit a Target and fixtures. Now I need maybe $1 million, right? Because there's so much less square footage. What happens with all the excess equipment? it goes to the used market, and it brings down the value on the used market. And that's what we're trying to get at. What's the fair market value of Target's property on hand currently? So just very telling things here I thought about Target's data. Now let's turn the page here to page 76. We've talked a lot about Target there, but as I've said throughout this presentation, you can't just look at the company that owns the assets to determine obsolescence, much like the Board of Equalization told us. You kind of have to look at the industry and see how the industry is reacting and how these assets are valued as a whole, and not just one specific company. So we looked at 10 other retailers, and Target was not alone in its decrease. As we see here, as an average for all of our retailers, the 10-year period drop on trended sales per square foot, a 22.74% drop. That's inclusive of Target, Kohl's, Walmart, Macy's, Sears, JCPenney's, 22.7% drop. Meanwhile, let's compare that to Amazon.com. They started out in 2008. Target was a $71 billion company. They're 21. As of our lien date, they're over 170. Target's sitting here at 70. They've more than, they've blown Target out of the water at this point, showing a 715% increase over the same time period to their e-commerce, as we've shown a 22% drop to brick and mortar retail. That's significant. That's very significant. And is the cause of why the used market has such low values for these fixtures. So again, looking at 10B and 10C, exact same analysis we just talked about, just for the 17 and 16 tax year. So I'll skip ahead now to tab 11A. I'm on page 191. Give everybody a second. So this was our last analysis that we did using kind of sales and Target-specific data on our end. We looked at the market capitalization for Target and big box retailers. Now, market capitalization, just to give you a little bit of background, is essentially quantifies the size of a company. It takes the average price per share as of a certain point and multiplies that by the total outstanding shares in the market. And what we see here is pretty telling. On the whole, for all of our group of retailers here, we see a decline in market capitalization. We took the peak market cap at 2006. We felt like that was really before e-commerce really took hold and really started taking over. And we compare that to the market capitalization as of the 2017 fiscal year end. So that would be as of 1/1/18 lien date. And for our population of brick and mortar retailers here, the situation looks pretty bleak, right? We have a 45% drop in market share over that period. And as a comparison point, we said, let's look at Amazon again, right? Amazon has enjoyed a 2,730% increase in their market capitalization over the same period of time. Now, I've had other counties bring up the fact, well, yeah, Mark, that's great, but there was a recession in there, right? Everything was down compared to that. Well, to kind of combat that, we went ahead and we pulled the S&P 500 as well. And the S&P has bounced back handsomely and actually gone more than bounced back. It's had an 80% almost increase over its peak 2006 market capitalization. So this is not an issue with recession or recessionary period. This is an issue with specific companies operating in an industry that is changing at an accelerated rate, and investors saying, I'm not sure that's such a safe bet anymore. And let's see where they're putting their money. They're putting their money in e-commerce and other types of things. So again, very telling to us in terms of quantifying the obsolescence. So at this point, we took a step back and said, okay, we know what the Board of Equalization has given us guidance to do, and they said you can go to the market, which we've done here through sales and some other ways, but we went back to that passage that says the best way to get about getting the true value is to get a sales comparison, market-based appraisal. And that is what we did. We went out and we engaged land map appraisals to do site inspections and physical inventories and come up with a sales comparison approach to value for every location within Ventura County. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mitchell. He's going to walk you through the appraisal, his comparables, and how they kind of came to their determination of value.
Good morning, board members. Thank you for your time. My name is Mitchell Rolnick, ASA. I'm a accredited senior member of the American Society of Appraisers. I work for Landmap. Landmap has been doing ad valorem tax appraisals for close to 30 years. We've been specializing in retail now for close to 13 years. With that being said, if we can go to the large binder.
You're referring to 2018, correct?
Correct, sir.
About that. Applicant's exhibit number 2.
So, again, we've been specializing in retail for close to 13 years and working here in California for, I believe it's close to 10 years at this point. We know very well what's happening in the retail marketplace. When Altus came to us and asked us to take a look at Target, we knew full well what was going on in the retail marketplace. Simply, if you just turn on the news any given night, you find store closings, unfortunately, is a common occurrence. Companies such as Kmart, Sears, Target themselves in Canada, 133 stores. It's inevitable. You can't get away from retail closing its doors, unfortunately. And as an appraiser, you also have to realize what the market is you're looking at. Target, if you go into a Target, you're walking into a hybrid store. You're walking into a grocery store / clothing store / electronics store / Starbucks. So you can't just look at one little tiny piece of retail. You have to look at grocery. You have to look at clothing retail. You have to look at the whole retail marketplace. So along with our Sears and Kmart's and that such, we also have to understand and look at the store closures and the remodels and what have you of grocery stores, which was very significant as well in this time frame. So that being said, if we could turn the first page of our appraisal, there's just some things I have to get on the record for the, so I have to read a few things. Our appraisal was conducted for Mr. Patrick Broom, Senior Director of Altus Group. This is a retrospective appraisal, and it was made as of January 1st, 2018. Turning to page 2, this is our table of values. So this is our appraised value for each of the locations that we've appraised. There's 8 locations. To make it easy, mainly I'm just going to speak about the first one here, which is the address is 2907 Cochrane Street in Simi Valley. Turning a couple of pages to page 6.
Strictly the pictures.
FF&E, yes, sir. Just furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So on page 6, the intended purpose of the appraisal. The intended purpose of this appraisal is to determine the fair market value installed of the items listed in this report, including a complete inventory of the FF&E or furniture, fixtures, and equipment located at various Target Corporation stores throughout Ventura County, California. The client's intended use is for the tax appeal proceeding in Ventura County, California. The appraisal report can only be used by the client and the third party mentioned above as of the appraisal date. Date of appraisal, the subject property was appraised as of January 1st, 2018, and this is a retrospective appraisal report. Interviews with management were conducted to determine if any additions or deletions have occurred up to the date of inspection by the appraisers on August 29th, 2014, and February 4th, 2019 through February 8th, 2019. Turning the page to page 7. Again, my appraisal is, I have to follow the guidelines of USPAP as well as the ASA, and that's who my appraisal is conformed to. With that being said, we follow an ASA definition of value, which I'll also read you the California definition. You'll see they're pretty much identical. But on page 8, the definition of value we've utilized is fair market value installed. It is the estimated amount expressed in terms of money that may reasonably be expected for an installed property in an exchange between a willing buyer and a willing seller with equity to both, neither under any compulsion to buy or sell, and both fully aware of all relevant facts, including installation as of a specific date. This amount includes all normal, direct, and indirect costs such as installation and other assemblage costs to make the property fully operational, but does not have to be supported by business earnings. California's definition of market value in section 110.1 states, full cash value or fair market value means the amount of cash or its equivalent that a property would bring if exposed for sale in the open market under conditions in which neither buyer nor seller could take advantage of the exigencies of the other, and both the buyer and seller have knowledge of all the uses and purposes for which the property is adapted and for which it is being capable of use, and of the enforceable restrictions upon those uses and purposes. Pretty much the same definition, just different verbiage. So, that being said, what we're aware and are aware is that the tables that are being utilized here in the state of California are a direct derivative of Marshall and Swift. Marshall and Swift and the tables here in California are a direct derivative of Iowa curves. As Mr. Miller had stated, the Iowa curves were developed in the 1930s to value the physical life of utility poles. They are a simple survivor curve just of physical deterioration. We know in order to correctly assess or appraise anything, you have to consider all forms of obsolescence, physical, functional, and economic. And we feel and we know by evidence that we will present to you today that the state of California is not considering all three. They are only considering physical. So with that being said, we went and we took a physical inventory of all the locations. If you can turn to the inventory section, please, the tab of the appraisal. And we're going to turn a couple pages into page 26. So we had multiple teams of inspectors go out and physically inventory these stores. And what you have in front of you is our inventory, which turned into our appraisal. And I'm just going to walk you through it so it makes sense to you. The first column is a photo column. So we have taken photographs at a Target store. This is only for the user's aid. This is not something that is required. We do it just to help out the user or the appraiser. So we do it so that you can have an idea of what pieces of equipment look like or what we're speaking of in our appraisal. And so if we've taken a photo or if there's a photo of a like item, the photo number will appear in this photo column and will correlate to the photographic presentation tab later on in the appraisal. The next column is the quantity. That's the quantity found on site by the inspectors. The next column is the size. If a size correlates to the subject, the size we found in this column. A size can also be such as with a computer, the size of the RAM, the processor, things of that sort. Next column is the comp number column. This column correlates to our comparable sales backup data. It's the market research that we derive the value of each subject from. The next column is the description. This first one was a wood laminate desk with 2 pedestals. It was a 30 by 60 desk. The next is the condition column. Now, the condition column is not just a physical condition. You have to consider, again, all forms of obsolescence, and that is done in our conditions as well. The best way, and my favorite explanation to make it simple to understand, is you walk into a location and you see a computer that looks brand new. Automatically, your mind's going to say that's in good condition. As an appraiser, you have to look deeper. And when we look at the computer and we see that it has a Pentium 3 processor and a 100 gigabyte hard drive, we know that's not a good computer. That's now a fair, possibly a poor computer because of the other obsolescence in the piece of equipment. So we would put the condition as fair or poor rather than good because it's not just physical. The next column is the value determined from the market research. And then the last column is the value from each multiplied by the quantity found on site. Each piece of equipment was conducted and done this way. And if we can turn to page 32, please. We have included an upward adjustment of 25% for delivery, installation, and sales tax. That is a depreciated delivery and installation. When you run a cost approach, delivery and installation and all the intangibles are included in the original cost, and that original cost is depreciated. And in order for us to value in the same realm as the cost approach, we also have to use a depreciated delivery and installation percentage. And we have a study, and here in this case, we've utilized a 15% with 10% being for sales tax. Now I'd like to just give you a little look into some of our comparable sales.
Brendan? Yes, sir.
It's gonna be me.
That's okay?
That's me. So unfortunately, if you look through what Altus has given you, they've had to print our comparable sales 4 up to a page, making the print extremely small, unfortunately. So I just wanted to touch base and give you an idea of what some of these comparable sales are going to look like. You're going to find comparable sales from sources such as eBay, such as price guides, such as useprice.com, as well as what I call internet storefronts. eBay, you will not find any auctions. There's no liquidations. This is all willing seller, willing buyer with a buy it now price. If a willing buyer wants to pay that price, they press that button and they purchase from that willing seller. That being said, I'm going to show you about 5 or 6 comparables for different market segments in the report. First, we have the very first comparable, which was the desks. Here, and again, something I'm not sure if I mentioned, we don't just include one comparable. We include multiple comparables with a range in value, and we always utilize the high end of the range. Never the middle, never the average, never the low, always the high end. So here from comparable 1, we have, this is SOS office furniture, new and used office furniture. We've also gone to, this is, it's even small on my screen. Shore Office Warehouse, which is here in California. This is a Hahn Executive Honey Desk from a used furniture location, Office Pro online. There's multiple, I'm not going to read you all of them, but we're still on comparable number 1. If you look at the bottom middle of each page, you'll see, in this case, an 01. That means that it was for subject 01. Now we're on 02 and so on and so forth. So that was furniture. Computers, as I stated, we utilized a price guide called useprice.com. What useprice.com does, and it's actually stated here on the second page, is the used prices are derived from dealer surveys gathered nationwide. Dealers are asked to provide the selling price and days to sell. The used price is then calculated based on what an average store could sell the product for in 30 days or less. The price is proven to be accurate, an accurate reflection of the actual marketplace. The data is also reviewed by various dealers, pawnbrokers, and online sellers that make up our board of advisors who are selected for their experience in used equipment. So again, they give us the MSRP.
Can you tell me what page that was on, just so I can write?
This will be page 455 of the appraisal.
That was the last one?
No, ma'am, I'm sorry, the first one,
The description that you just read.
that would be 456.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So this first one gives you the MSRP. It gives you the retail used value, which again ranges from 25 to 30. We use 30, as well as the wholesale values. So that would be, for the most part, how our computer equipment was done. For network, now here we've reached our first, of what I'm showing you, our first eBay comparable. Here we have a Cisco WSC 3750G48 for $300. This is a used piece of equipment. Not only have we gone to eBay, as I stated, this was a refurbished piece of equipment, as you can see here, states refurbished. We've also gone to storefronts, and these are also refurbished pieces of equipment. Now, the eBay was $300. This storefront is $295. This next storefront was $285. This next one, again, these are all refurbished, was $225. So basically, we've only utilized refurbished. We've used the high end, and the high end came from eBay. And there are more for this subject. So now we'll get into retail. So here with our gondolas, which obviously is going to be a very large part of the store. We went and we have, again, multiple comparables, many from storefronts such as here, storefixturepros.com, eBay, which is furniture fixtures, fixture finders. So obviously this is a used fixture storefront on eBay. Another eBay. Then this is KZ Fixtures, buystorefixtures.com, so on and so forth. So basically, I'm just trying to show that we're looking at the whole market. We're not just looking at one spot. Lastly, just we'll look at the clothing racks. So here again, the clothing racks. Once again, we're going to storefronts as well as eBay and utilizing multiple comparables and taking the high end of that range. So that's how our comparables were conducted. We obviously, we have a very large database, and as you can see the size of this report, we cannot include every comparable that we have in our database. What we have included is the high end and a range below that. We have additional that we could have supplied if need be, but we felt that this was suffice of what we needed to show. So that's how our appraisal was done. If there's no questions at that point, I'd like us to turn to this exhibit. I'm not sure what number it is. I believe it's 5.
The master study?
Yes, sir.
Yes, the master study will be number 5.
Okay, we have applicant's exhibit number 5 to introduce.
So what you have in front of you is, again, the first part, the appraisal guidelines. These are the guidelines mostly from the IAAO, ASA, USPAP, the guidelines that I must follow.
They just had trouble finding it. They got it.
Additionally, we have things from Marshall and Swift, which Mr. Miller already went over, and the Iowa curves, which I'm going to go over. Now, one thing Mr. Miller did not show with the Marshall and Swift, I do want to read onto the record. So if we can turn to the red page number 140 of 397. So I don't believe he read any abnormal, isolated, or temporary case of external obsolescence, usually computed separately, can be measured by market extraction. And another thing that I know he did not say, under external indicators, the very first one is demand supply imbalance, saturation or monopoly. That's what issue we have found. We have found, simply because of the extent that and the ease in which you can find this equipment used, there is an influx of this used equipment in the marketplace, from store closures, store remodels, the lack of store openings opposed to closings. There was a 21% drop in store openings opposed to closings, which I'll show you in a study here. All these things drive down the value of this equipment. You might have had, in the 1930s, when the tables that are being utilized were made, you could have had one person selling this pen. They could have asked $1,000 for it. They're the only ones selling it. Today, you have hundreds of people selling this equipment. They have to vie for your dollar, driving down the value of that equipment in order to get your dollar. Just like Target is remodeling and changing their stores to get you in their doors, the sellers of this used equipment are doing the same thing. So moving forward, next we have a study that was done on the Iowa curves. And if we can turn to page 155, please. Again, the red numbers, not the black. The title says Iowa curve misapplication and underlying fallacious assumptions. So I'm just going to read the red underlined. It says the most profound misapplication of the Iowa type curves for the quantification of appraisal depreciation results from the assumption that the Iowa type curves quantify all forms of depreciation, physical, functional, and economic. This assumption is distinctly incorrect. Iowa survivor curves or other survivor curves cannot, do not, and were never meant to quantify economic depreciation. Economic depreciation is the result of forces affecting value outside the control of the property owner. The statistical analysis behind the development of the Iowa type survivor curves does not address laws of supply and demand. So you now have the creator of the curve for Marshall and Swift and the state of California telling the user we don't include economic obsolescence. There's no way for us to. You must make an adjustment for it, here specifically for supply and demand. So if we can now turn to page, okay, we're just going to jump to that. If we can turn to page 378, please. Actually, I'm sorry, 363. This is store openings and closings. So turning to page 364, states Land Map Valuation and Asset Services, Inc. has conducted research on the openings and closings of major retailers in the United States from 2008 through 2015. Data was gathered through various internet sources as shown in the articles herein. For each year, an inventory was taken on the number of retail stores, excluding fast food establishments, which were closed and opened. From the inventory, we were able to calculate the percentage of change and conclude that year 2011 is the only year where there were more store openings than closings. Based on the metrics, there is an average change of 21% from 2008 to 2015 that shows a decline in store openings. In most cases, this is due to the economic turndown that we have been going through since 2007. The research shows that in order to maintain profitability, some retailers had to downsize and dramatically reduce store openings, as Mr. Miller had stated with Target. And you turn the next page and the metrics is there for you. So if we could now turn to page 378, please. So as I had stated earlier, we have to also look at all the types of equipment in a Target, refrigeration, gondolas, things of that sort, and that's what you would find in a grocery store. So we looked at the grocery store market as well. Here, we have national supermarket chains purchased or merged just from January 13 to March 14, just 1 year. And we have a total of plus or minus 5,500 stores. On the next page, same time frame, we have a total number of 858 bankruptcies, closings, and market exits. In 2015, this isn't added together, but I believe it's close to 1,500 store closures, mergers, and acquisitions. I am not sitting here under oath stating that all these stores closed, all this equipment went in the marketplace. In no way, shape, or form. But when you have a store merger, you're going to have some store closures due to the fact that they're going to have competition with themselves, with stores being too close. So they have to close one. You're going to have, when they purchase these locations, you're going to have them come in and they have to make them look like their property. So that you're going to have remodels and refurbishments and things of that sort. So the equipment is going to reach the marketplace. Not all of it, but a significant amount. So now we're going to turn, lastly, to the state guideline tab, this last tab. Unfortunately, this is not numbered, but I have tried to write down how many pages we're going to turn. So if you would turn 8 pages after the tab for me. It's gonna say on the left-hand side of the page, supply and demand and market value, highlighted yellow. So, this is from AH 501. It states supply and demand and market value. What determines market value? A partial answer to the question has already been given in the preceding paragraphs. Value is determined by the utility of the property as manifested through the purchasing power of those who are interested in acquiring it. On the next page, market demand and market supply interact in a competitive market to determine the price and quantity of the goods traded. When the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are equal, there's a state of balance known as equilibrium. From an equilibrium position, if market demand increases while market supply remains constant, price tends to increase. On the other hand, if market supply increases while market demand remains constant, prices tend to decrease. That's what my argument is. And this is from AH 504. I mean 501. I apologize. So now we're going to turn to page 11. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3 pages. And we're going to be looking on the left-hand side. It's going to say percent good tables. Here they're talking about in AH 501, the percent good tables utilized by the assessor here in Ventura County. In mass appraisal program, depreciation estimates may be made using percent good tables. Percent good tables are used for both real and personal property. These tables are based on data for properties of different quality levels and use types. They have validity only to the extent that the subject property has experienced the usual depreciation for its age, quality, and use type. Any depreciation or percent good table should be used only as a guide in the estimate of value. A percent good table may reflect more or less depreciation than the market indicates. Therefore, whenever possible, the appraiser should verify replacement cost new, less depreciation by other approaches to value before accepting the table as the best indicator of value. On the next page, the comparable sales approach may be defined as an approach that uses direct evidence of the market's opinion of value of a property. In this approach, the appraiser estimates the market value of a subject property by comparing it to similar properties that have recently sold. In addition to actual sales, the appraiser may consider listings, offers, opinions, and the opinions of owners, real estate agents, and other appraisers as to the selling prices that comparable properties might command. Turning the page to the next page, the area of search. In selecting market data for analysis, an appraiser should focus on transactions pertinent to the subject property's specific market, in this case, the retail market. In general, comparable properties are those that compete with the property being appraised or have demonstrated effect on prices or other relevant components to the market in question. Any person in this room can go online and purchase any of the items in my comparables. That is the market for this equipment. Simply because you can press buy, and depending on how long they take to ship it to you, you'll have it in 2 days to a week. That is the market that this equipment has come down to it due to e-commerce. And with that, I will turn it back to Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Rollett. So if we can wrap up going back to Exhibit 1, just for a couple more moments, and then we will rest. I'm going to go to tab 13A, which is at page 247 of 307. Getting to the end. There. So this is essentially, we can appreciate the fact that county assessors have a very limited amount of time to kind of work with getting these assessments done, and they're going to utilize the cost approach. So what we've done here, we've created a cost approach. This is identical to the cost that Target rendered on their 571L, and we're using the proposed table here is the tables as recommended by the Assessors Association. So if we turn to page 248, what we've done here is we've basically taken, okay, this is the standard cost approach that the assessor's office has utilized. Let's compare that at the bottom here to Land Map's appraised value. And right above that, you'll see what we call our implied obsolescence percentage. Now, it's interesting here, we'll see it's about 37%. And that's consistent through all the locations, some a little higher, some a little bit lower. But at the bottom of page...
What page you're on?
Page 248, sir, 248.
48.
About 3/4 of the way down the page, there'll be a little 37% there. You see it?
Okay.
Okay. So that's the implied obsolescence from essentially utilizing the cost approach as rendered by Target using the recommended lives for the assessors compared to our Land Map appraised value. 37%, again, fairly consistent with all the locations. Some a little bit higher, some a little bit lower. Let's now turn to tab 14. And what this is an obsolescence summary that kind of summarizes the 3 different ways I quantified obsolescence using sales data and Target data. We have our Census Bureau sales for our NAICS code analysis, 33%. We have the comparable retailers, 10-year trended sales analysis at 23%, and the market capitalization at 45%, gives us an average obsolescence factor of 34%. What I find kind of surprising about all this is that whether I'm using my methodology of trying to quantify it using sales and other market criteria, or if I go to the actual market in which the equipment exists and find actual comparable sales, I end up hovering right around that same 30 to 35% reduction from the values issued by the county. To me, that just screams that this is quantifying obsolescence several very different ways, and we're always kind of coming back to the same answer, that the tables utilized by the county are physical deterioration only. They're not factoring in any form of obsolescence, and we can prove that by getting market sales-related data as well as getting market actual sales and comparables for the property on hand, and we come to that same obsolescence percentage, which to me makes a lot of sense when you're kind of comparing that cost approach. We talked about reconciling that cost approach to the market. That's effectively what we've done with our cost value schedules there. We said, hey, here's the cost approach. Here's what the market dictates. How do we reconcile that? Well, that 30% reconciliation is the obsolescence. So in summary, we have all 3 years of our obsolescence summary here. And then the last tab I want to go through, tab 15, is a summary of liquidation analysis. We do this a lot throughout the state of California in lots of counties. And one consistent theme is counties will say, well, yeah, those are just liquidation values that you're using in your appraisal. Target actually has liquidated, closed and liquidated several locations. And we see in the top half of this chart here are those locations, some of them throughout California, some of them as recent as 2018. And what we find is, on average, a liquidator is going to get about 5% good. If I compare the value that the fixtures got in liquidation to the book value of Target prior to the liquidation, we get about a percent good, implied a percent good of 5%. If I do the same thing for every year of Land Maps appraisal report, I see 33, 34, 32 for an average of 33% good. So obviously, we're not using liquidation values. These are actual confirmed sales, arm's length transactions that we're using to value this property. The final three tabs, tab 16, A, B, and C, is just a summary of our values. It shows the values on the roll currently, the appraised value from Land Map, which we feel is indicative of the actual fair market value, and then the associated assessment reduction requested on each account we have under appeal today. So with that, we will end our presentation and open up to any questions from the board members.
Before we do that, did you want to submit the 2016 and 17 valuations into evidence for consideration? We haven't done that yet.
Yes.
So the 2017, another big binder behind you will be Exhibit 3. And then 2016 will be Exhibit 4.
Are you going to reference them? Do you want me to hand them out?
We can, Brendan, when you say read them in, do you want to just read in?
Right, so once the board starts questioning, you'll be done presenting any evidence in your case. So anything else you want the board to consider for all 3 years should be submitted now and presented.
Okay, so the only thing that I would want to present are the actual values that are in those appraisals. The methodology, the analyses are all identical, so there's no additional facts other than the revised values that are included in the appraisal report. So,
We need to look through the books.
yeah, we'll read through the values and we'll go through what those reductions are.
Okay. So exhibit number 3 is which year? Is that 17? Are we going back?
Yeah, they're going in reverse order. So 3 would be 2017, 4 would be 2016.
Okay, so 2000, the appraisal for 2017 is entered as applicant's exhibit number 3.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And again, the very same methodology, same everything for the appraisal report. What we want to bring to the attention are the values on the roll compared to the appraised values. Brendan, should I read those in for reference, or can we reference them and have that be considered evidence?
Whatever you want. If you think there's anything you want to highlight for the board, they obviously have the materials in front of them, but
Okay.
Do you want to tell us what page they are? We can just make a note. That way, when we talk about it, we know where to,
Yes, sir.
we don't spend an hour going through this trying to figure where the number is.
Yes, sir. So the values are actually in both books. So if we turn, Exhibit 1 is, we have all three, our values are the last 3 tabs of that book. So 16, A, B, and C
Okay, in exhibit 1?
in Exhibit 1.
Okay.
But then we also have them in each appraisal report has a value sheet. So it really kind of depends on how you wanted to look at them. But
Yeah, it Looks
Okay.
like on Exhibit 3, it's on page 24.
it sounds right. Let me just confirm that for you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Page 24 is one of the instances of it.
Okay, thank you.
And then I'm thinking it's going to be a similar page on 2016. Let me open that up as well. Oh, it's also on page 2. If you want to look at that for the 2016 book, page 2. Same thing with the 17 book. Page 2 of the appraisal is a summary of all the accounts and the values.
Okay.
Again, as discussed, everything done with the appraisal is identical. Our methodology, our work around it.
Okay. And then do we want to enter 2016 as well, so it's on the record?
Yes, sir, please.
Okay. Okay. The 2006,
Exhibit 4.
2016 appraisal is Exhibit 4
Uh-huh.
for the applicant.
And that's on page 2 is the value.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Page 2.
Okay.
And that is the same case for 2017 as well, page 2 as well, or 24, either one, both reports.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so,
That's all.
so with that, are you finished with your presentation?
Yes, sir. Yeah, yes,
You are,
board
okay.
members. We conclude our presentation.
Okay, do we want to take a quick break or roll into questions? Break is fine with me. Okay, we'll do a 5-minute break. We'll return at 10 after 11.
Great.
Okay, we are back on record, and we have just heard the applicant's case, and now it is time for questions from the assessor's office.
Good morning, Brooke Hill representing the assessor's office. Before we move to questions, I have one thing that I'd like to bring to the board's attention. The applicant has provided a substantial amount of information here today. Prior to this hearing, the assessor made several requests under Revenue and Taxation Code Section 441D, which requires that the applicant provide the assessor all data relevant to the value of the subject property. One of the specific items that we requested was information related to the disposals of assets and information related to those assets that Target has disposed of. One item that we found, and there may be others, but this is a much bigger submission than we originally received. So I can tell you with certainty that there is one item. It is on page 303 of 307
Of which exhibit?
of the summary of evidence.
Exhibit
I think it's Exhibit 1.
So which page was that again?
It's the red numbered page 303
Okay.
of 307.
It's the first page of tab 15 of Exhibit 1.
And so on this page, is everybody there? On this page, the applicant has provided liquidation sales for Target equipment, which would be very similar to the equipment in question, as it is also Target assets. They failed to disclose this to us despite our requests under 441D. And therefore, under 441H, the assessor may ask for a continuance, and if the assessor does show, they shall be granted such a continuance based on the new submission of data that was not timely received under our request under Revenue and Taxation Code Section 441D. And so 441H provides that the assessor should have a continuance if they so request. We would like to do that, so we have the opportunity to review all of the information prior to accumulating this in a hearing. We feel this should have been presented to us prior. I do have a copy of at least one of the 441D letters that we sent, so you can see that we asked. And I also have a copy of an annotation that is very clear. In the conclusion, it reads that under 441D, it says information or records relating to his or her property, meaning the applicants in this case. And they found that Section 441D cannot be read to exclude comparable sales. And so that's what the applicant has presented us here today, is comparable sales that were not previously disclosed per our request in 441D.
Ladies and gentlemen of the board, it's one page that I threw in to counter a claim that I've received from several jurisdictions in doing this. I'm more than willing to take it out.
It's
We can
one
strike it from the
page.
record. I've flown all the way here from Maryland. This hearing has been set since literally January of last year. I'd really like to move forward and just remove that documentation from the packet. It's one page that they found, a page.
Doesn't it contain data that they requested?
These aren't disposals. The 441D request, if I recall correctly, was to give us details of assets that were disposed. These weren't disposed, they were liquidated. It's very different. I didn't dispose them in the ordinary course of business. This is the disposal date. This is what I replaced it with. This is a liquidation. And I brought it up only to the fact is, really, I should have saved it for rebuttal, and that's my mistake of including it in the book. But Every one of these I go to, they say those are liquidation values. Here's how it's not. Okay, that's a rebuttal piece of information, but it's one page. I'm more than willing to take it out. You can strike it from your record. Doesn't really impact the 306 other pages that I presented at all. It's a completely one-off analysis. Again, just to kind of show the fact that they're not liquidation values in the appraisal.
Okay. Any comments from council? Or anyone else on the board? You'd have to give us a second.
No, I mean, I guess to me, there was no 1606 that was done. We provided the information that we thought was relevant from the 441D. Never once did they ask for liquidation-related items in this 441D. To me, it's not a specific item for the 441D and would not therefore constitute a reset. Continuance.
I think we should speak in closed session.
Okay. Okay.
Have time to review
Okay.
the request and discuss the information that's presented.
Okay, that sounds good. Should we take a,
I don't think it'll take that long.
go ahead.
If I may, there is one additional 441D letter that was sent that I would like the opportunity to print very quickly and submit to the board. I think it will make it abundantly clear with this additional document.
Can I also ask a question of Target's representative?
Please.
Sorry. I also have a question for Target's representatives. Just to confirm, without having to go rewatch the video, when you presented this liquidation value evidence, am I remembering correctly that you said this is what the liquidation value, the percent good, but that's not what we used in our appraisals?
Correct. That is not, what I'm saying is this is what they've actually liquidated these things for. And I'm taking that as just saying, as a point of comparison to what our appraisal uses, we show significantly higher percentage, right? The other thing I'd point out is that this is the wrong address. We may have not received this 441D. We moved in April of 2018 to 20 White Avenue. So it's very possible I don't even have this 441D. It's the wrong address, so.
Well, certainly if the assessor has more information that we need to review, to make our decision, I would like to have that.
We should have that form before we go back behind closed doors.
Yes.
I sent an email. It should be here in just a few minutes.
Thank you.
In light of the fact that the applicant has said he is willing to take this page out of the report, does that resolve your issue?
The assessor would still object to moving forward. It's still information, and it's information about target property that's selling. I think we should be given the opportunity to review that and see if it does have an impact on our analysis, regardless of whether the applicant is using it in theirs.
Okay.
Did you get a copy of the appraisal, of all these appraisals before the hearing?
We did get many thousands of pages prior to the hearing. This document, the Exhibit 1, was a much smaller document when we received it. It was, I think it was only 100 pages or so. So it's grown threefold. I don't know what else is in this document that is new. Clearly, I haven't had a chance to go through the additional hundreds of pages. There is very likely something else in here that's new that we may need to consider.
In full disclosure for the board, the reason why it's increased in size is we've included behind each of those analyses the 10K documentation that we use in the analysis. That's the reason why it grew. I've given you the pages of Target's 10Ks as well as their market capitalization sheets showing each point in time. That's why it grew. It's just the support from the data that I provided and I walked them through. And again, I would say they're saying they need time to review this information. It's one page. Again, as the board member noted, they've had the appraisals for years at this point. And the information in this book, other than that other than that liquidation analysis, has been the same for months. One page.
To the assessor, I'm looking at your letter dated March 28th, 2018, item number 2E. List of all retail fixtures or equipment disposed from Ventura County Target stores?
Again, I think the other 441D we always send a very broad one to encompass because we don't always know what we're looking for. So our first letter always is very broad and states that we want all information related to the subject, to a determination of value. So we quote 441D in there, and we give them a list to help them kind of figure it out, but clearly they found other documents that are related to their opinion of value, and that is what we've made under our request. I can pass these.
Again, for the record, that document is not related to our opinion of value. It's contrasting our opinion of value to other ways in which we've found from Target. It has not anything to do with our opinion of value, which is the basis of the 10,000 pages we sent them years ago.
Would you like to tell us about this document?
Sure. So this is a 441D letter that was sent out on February 14th of 2017. In the first paragraph, we're telling the applicant that we need and request documentation pursuant to 441D. We've quoted it. You can see that 441D is quoted there. And we specifically ask, towards the end, it says, and other data relevant to the determination of an estimate of value are to be considered as information essential to the proper discharge of assessor duties. Now, other data relevant to the determination of value could be a number of things. You'll see in the next paragraph, we state, in order to assist you in preparing the relevant documents or information, not intended to be a definitive list, but in order to assist them, we've attached things that are usually required for the assessment categories noted. However, we cannot have an all-encompassing list. That would be an impossibility. I had no idea that they were going to provide me liquidation sales of Target assets. That is highly relevant to Target, at least for consideration. They considered it, and now they're asking you, no, don't consider it. Why did you include it in your report if you didn't want the board to consider it? The assessor should have the same opportunity to consider the data and find out what other new information is in here, which clearly they've stated there's many other documents that we should also have the opportunity to consider. They thought it was relevant enough to present it to you today. The assessor should be afforded that same opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Shall we?
Before, if I may, before the board.
Yes, go ahead.
Just for the record, this second letter was not sent to my office either. It was sent to Target Corporation. Secondly, board members, I feel that the assessor is making a large reach here and painting with a very large brush, saying anything you're potentially ever going to present, you should send us. We sent them a plethora of information, which they've decided to make no change. And in turn, they have sent me zero documentation. I've received nothing from the county. So to me, I think that this should be pretty clear that this is one page that is not based on our opinion of value, and we should be able to proceed with removing it from the packet, to me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, I had
Yep.
I wanted to clarify the address issue. I did check the clerk of the board's record, and at the time that the 2016 and 17 applications were filed, the 910 Ridgebrook Road, Suite 200 was the address listed on the application for Altus Group. At some point after the 2018 applications were filed, that was updated. I don't know exactly when, but it appears that that was the address used at the time the applications were filed for Altus Group. So I wanted to clarify that that was correct based on the application. And then on the February 14th, 2017 letter, that is the correct address for Target based on the applications. I don't know if the assessor could clarify if they also sent a copy to the tax agent. I believe it's your typical practice.
Our practice is to send it to both the agent and the owner. These were the easiest ones that I could find. I do see that there's other documents in our records here that You're already inundated with paperwork. I don't know. You want me to spend time looking for more?
I just clarify for the board, if that's any of concern, there is a property tax rule, I don't know which it is, but that states anything sent to the taxpayer that the agent is responsible for receiving from the taxpayer. So that is covered by a property tax rule, even if they didn't cover it. I just don't have that cited right now. But I just wanted to throw that out there in case there are any concerns with the address issues, since it is the clerk's responsibility to have proper addresses on file.
Okay.
Okay.
Then I also have a question.
Sure.
Just in case this, to Altus Group. I noticed as cross-checking your submission with the appeals on file, and for 2018, the appeals include challenge of penalty assessments because you believe the 10% penalties were improperly imposed. I did not see any evidence submitted to challenge the penalties. Is that issue being dropped from the appeals?
Yes.
Okay, and then also what your requested and value calculations, these are all before the 10% penalty has been added versus the assessor's value on roll is after the penalty is added. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. Oh, and last thing, sorry. Exhibit, I believe this is an error. Exhibit 1, tab 16A for the 2018 roll year. The second line for store 2760, the parcel number listed did not come up in our database, and this parcel number for the remaining 2 years is slightly different. Is it possibly a typo, and the correct parcel number for store 760 should be 132-0-311-025 as it is on the other years? Do you believe that's just a typo?
Yes, sir, I believe that is just a typo. My apologies.
I just wanted to clarify for the record since this will all be submitted. Okay. No further
Mr.
questions.
Lahakis, there is no penalty on the roll. The penalty has been removed,
Okay, so
so it's not an issue anymore.
That's what I was,
okay, so the value, okay. So then nothing I have would be, so my values in my system are all with the penalty, so we'll have to figure that out.
Yes, we'll have to figure it out.
Thank you. Okay, I have nothing further.
And
Okay.
back to the assessor again, I'm sorry to belabor this point, but again, in the other letter dated February 14th, I go back to item 3E, a list of retail fixtures or equipment disposed from the Ventura County Target stores. However, on page 303 of the applicant's exhibit, none of those are the Ventura County stores. So I just want to
Right, and if you look at the paragraph before the list, it says, please provide a copy of all available documents listed below, as well as any additional information you believe is relevant to a proper assessment of the property. So clearly, they now believe that there's 200 extra pages or so in this document that is relevant to the assessment of their property, and so that's the information. This is just a list to assist them. We very clearly state up front that this is to assist you, but we need anything else you want us to consider, basically.
again, just to reiterate, it's one page. The other pages were the same stuff we thought was important to include before. This was supporting documentation behind the calculations that we thought were important enough to share with them. So it's, she might think that there's hundreds of pages more, and there are, because it's the 10Ks and the support behind that. But I know the only page that wasn't in their stuff was page 303, and I'm more than willing to remove that from our book.
Okay. I think we are going to go behind closed doors.
Yes.
Hopefully, we'll be done in about 10 minutes, 15. Okay, we're back on the record. With careful consideration and a lot of discussion, we have decided to grant a continuance to allow the assessor's office to review the additional information that was not provided in the original 441D presented today. And at that point, when we do reconvene, we will continue where we left off with the assessor's office, starting the process with questioning the applicant's presentation. Do we have a date to continue to? There was talk of a month.
A suggestion, because I have been contemplating all worst-case scenarios in this special hearing. A month from today, we'll be convening with the same participants for a hearing on a related matter, and I had it up, not a related matter, but another retail store, January 13th, 2020. So I may suggest we continue to that date, since everyone's already cleared that in their schedules as being available. Begin, you pick up where we left off, as the chairman suggested, and then once the hearing on Target has been complete, we can start on for that day, what is Kohl's department stores, and see if we can't get through both, since it'll be a case and a half rather than 2 full cases. Or if not enough time, we could then continue to our third special date, which we have for all these same players for a hearing on Kroger in February. So I think that would be the most efficient use of everybody's time. Or we can try to make something else work sooner, but with the Christmas and New Year's holidays, that's going to be really hard to
Right. Okay.
squeeze in.
Okay. Assessor's Office, is there anything else you need data-wise, or has it all basically been presented and you just need to digest it?
I think we'll be digesting this, and we may send a follow-up request for more detail.
Okay.
I don't know what else we'll.
Right. Okay.
We'll take a look.
Okay.
If I could get some information from the assessor before the next hearing, that would be excellent.
Okay.
That would be really great.
Do you have
I don't
any-
want to have to fly back out here for another continuance if at all possible.
Absolutely. Understood.
We would be, in fact, I think we've provided the applicant all of the audit documents that outline our analysis. I don't believe anything has changed. I do think it would be beneficial if we had, at a minimum, a conference call to discuss this matter.
Sure. Set it up with our office. We'll be happy to oblige.
Okay, great.
Excellent. Looking for continuance, looking for a motion to continue to January 13th.
I didn't hear any of the parties give any input on that. It was just a suggestion. I don't know if we want.
I apologize for stepping on everybody's toes. Assessor's Office, does that date work?
I think the assessor's preference, given the vast quantity of sheer paperwork to get through for each case, would be to keep each case on its own day. As you can see, we've used up half a day, and we're not even halfway through the case yet. We're haven't even done the questions yet. So I
Correct.
think one case per day for this type of property is about all the assessor can bite off at one time.
Okay. So what does that put us on a separate date?
We can put a separate date. What I'm anticipating, maybe or not, is we'll only get through half of a second case on our next hearing as well, and then have a. So I'm thinking, but we can't predict that. So assuming that the next hearing case doesn't get continued,
Just as a thought, would it be possible to utilize the 13th for Target as opposed to Kohl's? Because at this point, we've started our presentation. I don't want months to go by without having picked back up Target. So if Kohl's is January 13th, can we just say that is now Target, and we'll put Kohl's to another date since we've started this hearing? I just hate to have months go by.
I agree. I
That
think
makes
that's
sense.
a great.
That makes sense. It would kind of be a disservice to everyone to start Kohl's without finishing Target.
I feel the same way.
When we get in the back, we're going to have to separate these two, and we're going to be, wait a minute, that was this conversation, and this is this conversation, and
Correct.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. If that's agreeable with the board, I think that would make the most sense. Pick this back up on the 13th and then postpone Kohl's to a later date agreeable to both parties.
to maybe the February date or something.
yeah, because essentially that's kind of what I was thinking without restricting it that far is, okay, we could get into Target on the 13th, and then if we magically have enough time to start getting into Kohl's, we could, but if not, you could continue it because everyone wouldn't have made a wasted trip out here. But if everyone wants to be certain that we won't be touching Kohl's on 13th, we could. So right now we have Kohl's on January 13th, Kroger on February 3rd. So what we could do, we can make January 13th for Target, leave Kroger on the 3rd and pick a new date for Kohl's, or we can just piggyback them down the line where we'd move Kohl's to February 3rd and Kroger on a new date. I don't think it really matters unless everyone had a certain order they wanted them heard in, but we could just leave what's on February 3rd alone and move Kohl's to a different date. It's completely.
To me, if I if I could weigh in, I think that Kroger is the more recent of our appeals, whereas Target and Kohl's are earlier years. So if it would make sense to just kind of kick everything down the line a little bit and do Target, then Kohl's, then Kroger, as it's the most recent year, and they've been waiting the least amount of time to get heard.
It makes sense, yeah, it makes sense to just finish Target now before we move on to the next one, whichever order you want, the second one. But no, I think it's imperative that we just, get Target on the schedule now and,
Right.
try to,
Yeah, I do, to confirm what Mr. Miller was saying, yes, for Kohl's, we have back to 2016 appeals, where Kroger doesn't start until 2017. So that would work if we set Target for January 13th, Kohl's for February 3rd, and then I can maybe work out a new date with everybody off the record for the third case, unless you want to try to figure out a third date. That looks like it would be in March sometime. Almost every week you guys have in the first 2 months of 2020 is booked up with special hearings. So I don't know if it's whatever your board's preference, but if you want to do that, we can make it work.
I suggest we move Target to January 13th and then just,
Have me figure everything else out off the record? Okay.
not exactly, I didn't want to throw that much into your plate. I certainly want to set it on fire and toss it to you. Should we do Target January 13th and leave Kohl's for February 3rd and then work on Kroger down the road?
Yes.
Sort of,
That works.
that sounds same thing but less troublesome for you?
Yeah, that may leave me only one date to have to figure out.
Okay, that's, yeah.
Everybody else is okay with that.
Does that seem amicable? Okay. Looking for a motion to continue today's hearing to January 13th.
So moved?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. And then do I need another motion to move Kohl's to February 3rd?
I don't know. It's technically not on the agenda today, so let me
Okay.
just work something else out.
Yeah, that's right. It's not today's
I don't-
docket item, so we don't have to.
I've never had this happen before, although I've contemplated this exact scenario happening. I've never had to actually do it.
Does it keep you up at night? Give you nightmares?
Brendan sends a confirming email to both parties. You can administratively continue the
Yeah, I have some leeway to do some rescheduling things on the board's behalf, so I'll
Okay.
take care of everything.
Okay.
And how are we on the 2-year waiver?
The waivers, I think, were executed, so we should be fine. Let's see if I can easily pull that up. Let's see, Target 2016.
I believe the continuance under 441H supersedes the requirement.
That does
for a waiver.
cover us. Yes, thank you for, I'm pretty sure there's indefinite 2-year waivers on file, but the code does say if 441D isn't complied with and a continuance is granted for that reason, the 2 years is told for that length of time as well. So we're backup covered in case the waivers are not there.
Okay.
I think the only year that might not have waivers be 18, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that'd be fine.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about 18 at this point.
Right.
I'm pretty sure we're covered. I can work it out with the parties if for some reason we're not.
Okay. And do we expect the Kohl's hearing to be similar to this one in length? I'm trying to see if we can combine maybe Kohl's and Kroger.
That was my initial thought, but as the assessor stated, I think it would be more beneficial. I think it's the same scenario, 3 different years. I don't know the count of properties, but I would assume, based on what I've seen, it's going to be the same thing over, but just for a different company.
Yeah, the property count is almost irrelevant for us in our presentation. We kind of go through the same steps. Actually, we have a couple different analysis we do for Kohl's over and above what we do for Target. So I'd say our end would probably be the same time. I'm assuming the assessor would be the same time too. So it probably does just make sense to separate them out. That way I also don't have to bring 3 suitcases across the country the next time for Target. It's a lot easier that way. With that being said, what can we do about the evidence that I brought today? For the
Yeah,
board?
so I will maintain that in our records.
Awesome.
You will be responsible for bringing your copy back. The assessor will be responsible for bringing their copy back, but the official clerk copy and all the board's copies will be locked up in my possession, so they'll be available for the board.
Thank you very much.
And if, that's about it.
Okay, so we are all set?
I think everything's been tied up, so if you want to adjourn the meeting, the time is 11:57 a.m.
Meeting is adjourned.